right, what I want to do in this video is give you guys a couple of ideas to take with you as you consider perspective as it applies to an interior space. I think it's important because sometimes it can be a little confusing when you're dealing with interior space to kind of think about the box, that mother form, exactly how does that relate to an interior, because you know, you're essentially inside the box when you're inside an interior. But the first thing to keep in mind is when you're looking at the big structure of the room that you happen to be drawing, to just take a moment and ask yourself and to try to pinpoint, am I constructing an interior in which I'm looking directly at one of the walls? So almost like a one-point perspective situation. Am I looking front on to a wall? Is that how I'm oriented? And if that's the case, you're gonna draw something like this. So here's my one-point perspective situation where, you know, like these lines are parallel to one another and these lines are parallel to one another. I'm looking straight on to the front of that box, of the interior of that box, right? These lines are going to move uphill or downhill away from those points, okay, depending on if they're below your eye level or above your eye level. The angle of these lines, by the way, same kind of thing as we were talking about the station point. As you move horizontally, these lines aren't necessarily going to be the same. The closer you get to this wall, the more steeply uphill or downhill those lines are going to run. The further away from the wall, the flatter these lines are going to become. Okay, so it's the same kind of thing. You want to think about where these lines are relative to your eye level, and then how are you positioned closer to the wall or further away from the wall. Okay, but now if you don't orient directly at a wall like this, then you're sort of looking, you're basically kind of looking towards one of the corners of the room. You're oriented towards one of the corners. And then you get something that looks like this, where you have two sets of lines that are moving uphill and downhill. So you're not going to have here, we've got a horizontal because we're looking straight at it. But this corner, so this corner, say if we were looking directly into this corner, instead of this line being horizontal, it's going to move uphill just because of how I'm oriented. Okay, so it's important to think about that before you start the drawing of the larger structure of the room. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention is sometimes for me anyway, when I started doing this, it used to be confusing about like when I was looking at these lines, are those going uphill or downhill? And so it's good to have some sort of idea that helps you orient yourself. Okay, that line is definitely moving downhill, you know, in terms of how I'm looking at it. And this is what kind of helped me to sort of figure that out, is instead of thinking of these walls as just flat surfaces, to think of them as dimensional, as box-like forms, right? So the wall is cinder block or whatever. It's got a dimension to it, so it's like a long block, right? So if I think of this long block over here, and what I do is just kind of mentally take a cutout at some area, just pretend like it's see-through or something. So if I do that here, if I just take and put in a near corner and create, you know, just in my mind's eye, a cutout so that I can sort of see it as a dimensional form. What I've effectively done here is I've created a sort of a rectangular block up there that I know how to make perspective to conform to. This is above my level, so from this near corner, these lines have to go downhill. So this line here, I know, okay, that's definitely going downhill away from me. So I can kind of figure it out that way. Same thing down here. This is going uphill. If I made a block-like shape here, I would see that from the near corner, the lines are moving upwards. So maybe you won't have this problem, but it was an issue for me until I learned to visualize. The last thing I'll mention is it's just important that anything you put onto the wall has to conform to the perspective of that wall. So in perspective, anything that sits on a plane in perspective has to conform to the perspective of that plane. So if I put, say if my eye level is here, so there's a horizontal, my eye level. If I put a door in here, Okay, the top of the door is above my eye level, which means that this line across the top has to move downhill, right? Because that's above my eye level, just like this line, except it's not as steep as that line because it's closer to my eye level. So as I go up away from my eye level, that downward slope is going to become more and more dramatic. And the converse is true down here. As I get further and further below my eye level, the more steeply downhill these lines are going to run. So if I put a picture frame over here, the top of that picture frame would run slightly downhill because it was a little bit above my eye level. The bottom of the picture plane would have to run slightly uphill because it's below my eye level. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Anything that goes onto that wall has to conform to the perspective, and you do that by finding where your eye level is so that you know where the lines are tilting upwards or downwards.